This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by Energy Hub. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. My guest in this episode of the podcast series on virtual power plants is Nick Chaset, Octopus Energy US CEO. Nick is going to describe a new partnership between demand response provider Voltus and Octopus Energy, an aggregator of distributed energy resources, or DER. This partnership could expand the use of VPPs to meet the growing electricity demand from large loads like data centers and keep electricity costs affordable. Nick's over two-decade career in clean energy policy has included private sector work with companies like Exelon and Kema and public sector work with the Barack Obama presidential campaign. Nick was also a special advisor for DER to California Governor Jerry Brown and Chief of Staff to California Public Utilities Commission President Michael Picker. He was CEO of Ava Community Energy before joining Octopus Energy in 2024. So, Nick, data center electricity demand has everybody in the power sector scrambling. But this Voltus partnership, Voltus Octopus Energy partnership, is a big deal. What is Voltus's concept of bring your own capacity for data centers? And how will this partnership with Octopus Energy expand it?
So the starting point of the bring your own capacity framework is in organized markets where new large loads have to demonstrate that they're bringing net new generation capacity that meets, say, a PJM capacity market eligibility criteria or a MISO eligibility criteria. The premise here is that you can more quickly, more cost effectively source this net qualifying capacity from load flexibility than from, say, building a new power project. Today there's a lot of trading of existing plants. I'm purchasing a large gas plant or nuclear plant or a large solar plant, and I'm counting it towards my project. But from a market operator's perspective, you're not adding new capacity. It's just that was being counted over here, and now it's being counted for me. They need net new. And so the premise of bring your own capacity is empowering large loads to partner with sources of flexibility at scale and to get that flexibility into the market in ways that it has not been in the market previously. So that is a massive unlock. But to date, it's been very much focused on large commercial customers. Rightly so, when you think about getting new megawatts quickly, large commercial loads make sense that you can get 5, 10, 50 megawatts of flexibility very quickly. But the residential customer opportunity is equally significant. The residential opportunity is equally significant, but has to be engaged with differently. And that's where Octopus Energy is coming in. We're coming in to unlock residential flexibility at scale, initially to support this specific flavor of bring your own capacity, participating these assets in capacity markets. But really the goal over time is to redefine the asset category so that residential flexibility can be used as net new capacity, whether it's in an organized capacity market, whether it's for a utility that's operating more in an integrated resource plan, or another accounting framework.
Interesting. I want to let our listeners know that we are going to have Dana Guernsey, the CEO of Voltus, on the podcast, and she's going to talk to us about how the bring your own capacity contract makes it possible to provide big markets with capacity, excuse me. And I also want to make sure that our listeners understand that when you say residential resources, you're talking about customer-owned devices. Octopus Energy aggregates those customer-owned devices and turns them into capacity in the same way that Voltus uses larger resources. Am I saying that right, Nick?
That's correct, right? It's engaging with households around the devices that can easily flex up or down based on a signal. So could be a smart thermostat, could be an electric vehicle, could be a battery if a customer has one of those, could be a heat pump. Increasingly consumers have many devices in the home that can make small tweaks around the edges to how they operate, don't really impact comfort or utility of the device, uh, but reduce consumption during really high periods of high peak demand.
Right. And the interesting thing about the partnership that you have with Voltus is Voltus is sort of renowned through the energy industry as having figured out a way to contract with markets to provide that capacity, that urgently needed resource when the demand spikes. And now they're going to bring that expertise to the aggregations that Octopus Energy forms. Is that
That's right. So it's really a two-way partnership too, right? So
correct?
Voltus has built a best-in-class technology stack and set of capabilities to facilitate participation of load flexibility in organized markets. PJM, MISO, KISO, three great examples.
Yeah,
Octopus is deploying similar sets of solutions into the utility operating system. And so Octopus is really, I would say, taking more of a utility-facing strategy to facilitating flexibility, and Voltus is taking a market-facing strategy for facilitating flexibility. So that's another sort of angle to this partnership. We believe there are going to be increasing opportunities to directly partner with utilities to bring them capacity to either, reduce peak energy demand or over time for them to be able to integrate flexibility into distribution and transmission system operations. So
yeah.
we at Octopus are really focused on being the layer between the flexible load and the utility to help orchestrate and support and engage and operate.
Some of the people that I've talked to recently about what VPPs are doing and what VPPs are capable of have said that it sort of all started as demand response some years ago, but the demand response has sort of evolved into VPPs, and that's really what Octopus Energy is doing. Is it's bringing evolution now uh, at a higher level and with more expanded capabilities. I think that's the way to say it. Is that
Yeah, that's right. I'd say traditional demand response operates as, an emergency call option. You know that in an emergency, you can literally call large customers up and say, we need you to ramp down. And then over time, it's become more automated. But it's an option that you don't integrate into your day-to-day operations. The Octopus approach is really one where we see flexibility as a core operating strategy for, in our case, we're also a retail supplier. So in our retail operations, flexibility is part of how we operate our business every single day. And it
mm,
affects the cost of goods sold. It affects our customer engagement strategy. It really touches everything that we do around our customers. And so now we're taking that know-how and that experience, and we are positioning it as a service that utilities can acquire to be able to deploy. So the best in class Octopus operators and know-how, that becomes something that a utility can take and say, I am going to bring Octopus in to help give my customers an Octopus-like experience.
interesting. Well, I want to ask you now about a couple of different things that I've seen in the press about the Voltus Octopus partnership that are kind of specific examples of what this can mean. Voltus and Octopus are developing a like a residential option for bring your own capacity that can bypass, as I understand it, these interconnection queue backlogs that have delayed bringing capacity online. And we see in the headlines all the time threats to reliability, threats to being able to deliver electricity on time and when it's needed, um, because of these interconnection queues holding back generation from getting online. It seems that what this partnership is somehow going to get data centers online faster and at lower costs. Can you explain that, what that means, how you do that?
Yeah, so there are numerous numerous different reasons why data centers are struggling to come online faster. It may be that there is a deficiency in available generation capacity that needs to be addressed before you can bring a new large load on. There might be a grid constraint. So there's just during some number of hours, the transmission or distribution system does not have enough headroom to support the connection of the large load. There's also an affordability dynamic where communities and regulators are looking at the addition of this large load and questioning whether that addition is going to cause undue increases on rates for all other customers. Bring your own capacity is really designed to get at all three of these dynamics, in some cases all at once, right? So bring your own capacity as currently conceived by Voltus is focused on that generation capacity because that's where the market rules are set to allow flexibility to participate. So today, bring your own capacity, it's about eligible resource adequacy or eligible capacity in that market that a large load can point to and say 100, 200, 300 megawatts of net new capacity are coming into the market as a result of the agreement I have entered into with Voltus or Voltus and Octopus. So that deals with that over time as you start to be able to demonstrate operationally that flexibility is a solution to these constraints. Operators will similarly start to look at the demand on a distribution system and say, I have 200 hours where your 500 megawatt data center hits a constraint. If you can reduce demand elsewhere in the distribution system during those 200 hours, you alleviate the constraint and I can connect your device. And that's sort of phase two of bring your own capacity. And related, and I wouldn't say call it phase three, it's sort of related to both one and two, is this affordability dynamic. And it's if we can actually financially remunerate the customers at scale to facilitate connection of data centers, it creates this win-win where they're getting paid, thus reducing their energy burden to bring on new large loads. So the
Yeah,
affordability dynamic is, directly affected by the flow of funds there. Instead of flowing to a large generator that doesn't necessarily benefit the individual residential consumer, you're actually paying the individual residential consumer to flex their data. You're paying the individual residential consumer to flex their home.
here's a quick note from the sponsor of our series of podcasts about virtual power plants, Energy Hub. What if everyday devices had the potential to strengthen the grid when it's needed most? Energy Hub helps utilities turn that potential into dependable capacity by coordinating thermostats, EVs, batteries, and other devices so they work together as virtual power plants or VPPs that respond to grid needs in near real time. Energy Hub's latest white paper lays out a maturity model for VPPs that can be planned and dispatched with the same confidence as conventional plants while being 40 to 60% less expensive to build. That's why more than 160 utilities across North America partner with Energy Hub to manage over 2.5 million devices that provide 3.4 gigawatts of flexible capacity. Read the white paper and discover what VPPs can do for your grid at energyhub.com. Yeah, so I want to come back to that in a minute, but I want to go back to one and two. So that example that you mentioned, that was a beautiful example. you can affect the usage at another place on the system so that the system is no longer stressed, but you didn't really necessarily add anything to the system. So you don't have, nothing goes into the interconnection queues. And so there's no waiting to get new generation online. Am I
And,
saying
and
that
and
right?
and that's the magic of it, right? Is that you're not adding a layer of uh, planning and construction. There's already enough challenge associated with building the data center. If you have to sort of build that and then build a new large generator, now you have two layers of potential delay. Under this model, you are really tapping into the latent flexibility that we know is already there and is already significant. And we have just lacked the market signals to encourage customers to be able to participate.
Interesting. So you didn't have to spend money to build new generation. You didn't have to spend money to upgrade the system to bring new generation onto the system. And so right away, the data center can function. So it's online faster, and nobody has to, well, almost nobody has to pay any really significant costs, which means it doesn't drive up the cost of electricity. Is that right?
The data center still may have costs associated with its own sort of
Right.
connections, but right, there's not a secondary layer of costs associated with paying for the transmission necessary to connect a generator that it would um, then be relying on. And I think that's actually a really key point that when you're talking about new generation, there are costs associated with connecting new generation that can be peanut buttered across all customers, right? Certain interconnection costs, certain transmission upgrades will be spread. Relying on load flexibility instead of new assets obviates the need for that sort of spreading of costs associated with the new generation. And 100% of the costs of the load flexibility are going to be borne by the data
Right.
center.
The data center, exactly.
Yeah.
So that, and your other point was because we've seen across the country communities saying, no, we don't want a data center in our neighborhood. We don't want to have that because we're afraid that it's going to increase our electricity rates to bring it online, and it even could disrupt service. They demand the electricity, maybe we don't get it. There's a lot of, you know, uh, suspicion about these big plants and these big tech companies that enter into the argument. But the fact of the matter is, when Octopus Energy goes into the community and provides that energy using those very customers' devices, it you feel like it can really resolve that or eliminate that backlash. Is that accurate? Is that what your contention
I
is?
mean, look, I think we have a lot of experience seeing the design of smart ways of engaging with customers can eliminate backlash for big infrastructure. A few years ago in the UK, and we've now launched this in other countries, but a few years ago in the UK, it was essentially impossible to build onshore wind because of local community opposition. So Octopus came up with a product called Fan Club. Under Fan Club, if you live in a community where you can see a wind turbine from out your window, and if you sign up for Octopus Energy service, you get a discount on your electricity whenever the turbine is spinning. And the faster it's spinning, the bigger the discount. Guess what happened? Thousands of communities across the United Kingdom have now asked to host wind turbines because they see the direct benefit of the wind turbine on something that they care about, which is price of electricity. We believe a similar dynamic can be deployed with data centers,
Interesting.
whereby if a data center is being built in your community and you are able to benefit from the Octopus load flexibility program, or in a state like Texas where you may be able to actually sign up for Octopus Energy service, if we can deliver a benefit, whether it's a fixed dollar per month or it's a percentage of your bill, we believe consumers will actually start to think about this as a benefit. There's the added dynamic too that there's a growing concern that Data centers aren't just going to spike costs, but in some cases, they're burning on-site fuel. And so there's
Right,
a local air quality, local environmental impact. Load
right.
flexibility can significantly reduce the need to rely on fossil fuels to power on-site generation. So it has a second order effect of reducing, if not eliminating, the environmental impact of these large facilities.
That
And we
gets it.
think that those two dynamics together are just extremely compelling.
Yeah, that gets it at my last question. This is the last question. We don't have a whole lot of time, Nick, but I want to go into this, the economics of the whole uh, deal, so to speak. You've got Voltus and Octopus partnering. You've made it pretty clear that there are benefits to people that have these distributed energy resources, and that idea that you're reducing pollution at the local level, that's one benefit to non-owners of the DER. Are there other benefits to non-owners that, the other customers besides the enthusiasts for rooftop solar and batteries and electric vehicles? And
Yeah, so look,
I think it's important, by the way, before you answer that, but also I think it's important to start thinking about talking about how Voltus and Octopus make their money too. I think people deserve to know that.
yeah, so a couple things. One, it's, the way we think about the bring your own capacity opportunity for residential consumers is not just to go to the households that have these devices. That certainly that is a starting point because they have the flexibility, but is to think about this systematically and think about how do we actually go and deploy smart distributed energy technology into every home in a community. How do we put batteries in thousands or tens of thousands of homes to deliver those benefits? Or how do we deliver smart thermostats into every home in a community? So we do see this as an opportunity to actually deliver more benefits to people who don't necessarily have them today.
Just
Uh,
like everybody
but
once didn't have refrigerators in their homes, but now everybody has a refrigerator. It's kind
that,
of the same idea, right?
that's right. And I think the energy storage example is probably the most apt, right? Where you can say, consider a small community in West Texas that might be hosting a large data center. So our premise absolutely is that we would want to go systematically into that community and offer every household a battery, a smart thermostat, um, you know, s- another distributed energy resource if we identify as making sense and say this is the approach is every household should benefit and it creates a win-win. To your point
Some
around
people
how do
can't,
we make
but some people can't afford those things, or they don't, or they're afraid of them. They're reluctant. I mean, that's just the nature of a varied population in West Texas or the West Side of New York City. So, how do people that don't have those things benefit?
so there will invariably be people who don't participate and I think the way we think about their benefits, really kind of to the point we were talking about earlier, when we avoid system upgrades, we avoid layering new costs that are going to be spread across all consumers. So by taking the assets that we have, increasing utilization on the system instead of building new elements of the system, there's an inherent benefit to everybody.
Yeah, everybody's rates are not, they
Everybody's
don't go
rates
up,
are not going
don't go
up,
up. Right,
and the
exactly.
people who participate might see their rates go down.
Right. So we're almost out of time, Nick, but just I think it's important to let people know how do Voltus and Octopus make their money in this deal. It's all if you're saving all this money, how do Voltus and Octopus get paid?
So, I think it depends. In a market participating dynamic, there's a part of that value that is of those capacity payments from the large load do accrue to us as the aggregator and the facilitator. In an opportunity where we might be working directly with the utility, we might actually have a contract with the utility and say this is a service that we're providing through the utility. And so we have an as a service contract, which is there'll be a bit of a software license component, and then there's a bit of a professional services component on top of that. And you would expect to have some variability. The more flexibility you bring in, the more you get paid because your benefits are scaling.
Interesting. Okay. I think that's a simple and really straightforward way to explain it, and I think that's a good place to leave it. Everybody benefits with this kind of new thinking about bring your own capacity, whether it's from large generation or from distributed energy resources. And as this kind of a model gains momentum, there's going to be more benefits for everybody in the chain. That's all the time we have. I got to thank you. My guest has been Octopus Energy US CEO Nick Chaset. He's described this new Octopus Energy Voltus partnership and how it can expand the use of VPPs to meet growing large load demand and especially data center electricity demand. I also want to thank our sponsor, Energy Hub. And as always, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.